So thank you everyone for joining me today. What we're going to cover is how to move beyond traditional freight. And in particular, we're going to talk about how static rates and fixed contracts oftentimes expose shippers to price, service, and operational risk. And we'll talk a little bit about how dynamic pricing is really the future of freight and how that can help you to get the best price and guaranteed service. So before we dive into the actual challenges and solutions, let's do a quick round of introductions. My name is Bayo Ojuri. I'm the Senior Manager of Product Marketing here at LoadSmart. I focus on our messaging and value props for our enterprise broker solutions for shippers. And I'm joined today by our subject matter expert, Dan. I'd love for you to introduce yourself as well.
Thanks, Bayo. Daniel Gianantonio, Senior Manager of Account Management at LoadSmart. I support our enterprise account management team to ensure that our customers have a wonderful customer experience and also have access to all the fantastic tools that LoadSmart creates.
Now that you know us a little bit, let's talk a little bit about LoadSmart, the company. If you're not familiar with LoadSmart, we are a digital freight brokerage. We focus really on being customer-centric and delivering world-class service. We do that through a combination of technology and dedicated account teams, which really allows us to provide customized solutions and really meet shippers where they are. And we've had a real history of innovation and being first to market. And Dan, you could probably speak to some of those innovations that we brought to market.
Yeah, we were one of the first providers to market with a real-time API pricing available inside the TMS back in 2016. You fast forward to today, we're processing over 5 million quotes a year, but it's not just us. All the best-in-class TMS providers are adding more API connectivity and more API providers all the time. So it's safe to say we were onto something back then. We know there's real power in these dynamic solutions, and we believe the next frontier is in dynamic contracts. But before we talk about what the solution is, let's talk about what the problem is with today's traditional freight contracts.
Yeah, and I think that's a good segue into just kind of today's landscape for shippers. And I think one thing that we kind of see is that modern day transportation teams and shippers are often asked to be magicians and create magic. You're essentially balancing so many different variables, so many loads to cover. And you're doing this with volatile markets, limited bandwidth, both from a planner perspective, but then also IT resources. And then you're asked to do this all under budget. And Dan, I know you kind of speak with shippers on a day-to-day basis. What are you kind of hearing from them?
The common refrain we hear is there's always more things to do than there are people and time to do it. I was talking to one customer recently who's having their transportation team handle over 100 transactions per individual every day. But it's not just about completing your task. You also need to be a market expert to ensure that you're getting the right price, the right time from the right carrier. In a market that's ever changing, getting that right is a pretty incredible balancing act when you think about it. So what do you get when you mix a dynamic market with a static rate model? You get a scenario where shippers almost always lose. Combining this ever-changing market conditions with a static pricing model, you create an environment where there's a very narrow band we call the pricing sweet spot, where shippers are taking full advantage of the market. For most, though, this sweet spot it's a moving target the size of a marble. During the hot part of the market cycle, shippers are spending way too much time in their routing guide, waiting for acceptance, and then dealing with the higher costs and the lower service results of the spot market. In the cooler part of the cycle, shippers have fixed rates that are not in line with the deflationary market and are missing out on opportunities to gain back some of that money they overspent in the spot market during the previous cycle. So no matter what part of the cycle we're in, most shippers are overpaying when they rely on fixed rates.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Dan, I think the key is to, stop relying as much on static rates. And the solution here is dynamic pricing. And this isn't necessarily a one-size-fits-all solution. You can kind of think of dynamic pricing as a tool in your transportation tool belt. And there are kind of 3 key areas where you can start to introduce dynamic pricing to start replacing some more of your static rates and contract rates. The first is really around rate discovery. So it's the concept of having a dynamic, instantly bookable rate available in your spot portal for your planners to book without ever leaving their TMS. So there's no phone calls, no emails, no waiting on carrier responses to get a load booked. The second area is really around your routing guide and being able to add dynamic capacity directly into your routing guide and have that as an option to be auto-tendered. There's several different ways you can configure that based on price and volume, and Dan's going to go into that a little bit. And then the third area, which is really the frontier and the future of contract pricing, is dynamic contracts. And that's the concept of having a somewhat of a floating contract with margins that are incentivized kind of based on the rates that we're able to provide plus rate transparency And again, that 100% PTA guarantee. But before we dive into all of that, I would love for Dan for you to kind of just cover Dynamic Routing Guide and how that can provide value for some shippers.
Our Dynamic Routing Guide solution, which is one of the first products we created, we refer to it as the DRG, provides a way to insert live market rates into a static routing guide. Traditional routing guide has a series of fixed, static rates ranked in a specific order. By utilizing our API connectivity with our TMS providers and leveraging our pricing engine, we're able to insert a live market rate within that static environment so that shippers always have access to rates that are more in line with current market conditions. And since they're live rates, they are all instantly bookable with 100% tender acceptance. And because they are dynamic, the DRG provides value regardless of market conditions. So in a heating market, we find that shippers are dealing with primary tender acceptance exceptions as spot prices outpace contract prices. That means the primary carrier is rejecting their award and freight begins to fall down the routing guide. If a shipper is stuck with only static rates in their routing guide, then all of those rates are out of step with the market, just as the primaries are. The result is an excessive amount of time spent in the routing guide, which may ultimately end with the freight falling to the spot market anyway. By implementing a dynamic routing guide solution, shippers can avoid wasted hours cycling through the routing guide because dynamic rates are always and instantly accepted. This also keeps them from putting freight into the spot market, where rates are typically higher and service performance typically lower. Conversely, in a cooling market, shippers can leverage the DRG to take advantage of savings. As always, they can rely on LoadSmart to insert a live market rate. So if the primary rejects for any reason, we will be able to provide a rate likely cheaper than the competitor's static and dated rates. More though, what we're seeing is shippers use the DRG in a co-primary setting. This allows them to carve out a portion of their primary business for API pricing, so they are not entirely reliant on dated fixed rates. Or they can utilize the DRG once their primary carrier is satisfied, so their surge business takes advantage of the following market. So once that primary carrier has taken their 10, 20 loads a week, anything above that will only go to the API market, where the rates are more in line with the current market conditions. Either way, the result is an overall reduction in total freight spend with no additional work, like running additional RFPs. But dynamic routing guides are just one tool in a professional's tool belt.
Yeah, and I think, Dan, you touched on, one, how to add capacity, dynamic capacity in your routing guide, and how difficult it is to actually find that sweet spot, and how shippers are always trailing behind the market. And I think there's some other inherent flaws and challenges with static contracts, right? And partly it's how they are structured and how they're put together. So that first area is really that you spend a lot of time getting your bids in, getting those rates into your routing guide. But ultimately, when the market shifts, we find that parties aren't really committed, whether that be from a volume perspective or from a committed service perspective. The second area is actually how you get those rates, right? We know that carriers tend to underbid just to win awards. And again, that results in having somewhat of a messy routing guide and not having the most accurate rates. And then lastly, in a volatile market like we've seen over the past few years, whether it be a heating market in the last 2 years or a cooling market like we're seeing now, your fixed rates aren't always in line with the market. And again, the result of that starts to compound on each other. You either are exposed to overpayment, having really messy routing guides, or just having to spend a lot of operational time repricing and rebidding to be more in line with the market. And ultimately, there is a better way for shippers to construct their contracts and one, be a little bit more efficient and be more in line with the market. And that's really through dynamic contracts. And so, Dan, maybe you can walk us through how we set up these dynamic contracts and kind of what they look like.
Yeah. So far today, we've talked about the challenges of using static rates in a dynamic world and how traditional contracts prohibit shippers from taking advantage of the market. And now let's talk about what we think the actual solution is. Our dynamic contract solution is known as reliable contracts, the floating rate structure built on three foundations. First, 100% primary tender acceptance at all times, no matter what. This prevents the need for repricing when the market heats or cools. Second, complete rate transparency. We share our cost of hire on every load. Third, we've aligned the right behaviors to the right incentives by increasing our margins only when we provide savings to our customers. To put it more simply, our margins only go up when our shippers' costs go down. We start by working with our shippers to determine a set of lanes that are a good fit for reliable contracts. These are lanes of any kind of mileage or any volume, but they do tend to be historically volatile and or troublesome. Then we establish a ceiling. We will never charge our customers more than that ceiling amount, so they have something to budget to. From there, LoadSmart takes 25% of the savings for every dollar we buy below that ceiling. So if the ceiling is set at $1,000 and we buy at $900, our margin will be $25 and the customer will realize a $75 savings on that load. If we buy at $100, our margin will be $50 and the customer will realize $150 in savings on that load. Perhaps more importantly though, this is a fully automated solution. Currently, we have integrations to fully automate this flow with 2 major TMS partners, Blue Yonder and E2Open, with a third on the way. That means all this savings can be gained with no additional work and no additional touches for planners or finance. But to take this from the theoretical to the actual, we have a few case studies of actual customers put this into practice today and the benefits they've seen.
Yeah, and the first example is from Stanley Black & Decker. And really the challenge that they had was inconsistent volume and really hard to contract lanes. And on top of that, having a team that is really operationally lean. So they didn't really have the time to go back and cascade down the routing guide or even go back to the spot market or reprice those contracts. And so oftentimes they'd set up a contract. It may last from anywhere from 1 to 3 months, but ultimately it would fall short. And they'd have to figure out how to get capacity. And so the solution here was to set up reliable contracts. They started out with 1 outbound location. And the benefits they got was, again, getting those really hard to contract lanes under that 100% PTA guarantee. We've delivered 100% PTA for all of the loads to date in the program. And then they've been able to book a lot more efficiently. So going from 8 minutes, around 8-minute average to book a load down to 1 minute, given the guaranteed coverage. The other benefit is that they've also been able to move down with the market and driving a 5% cost savings across all their lanes. And this program has been widely successful for Black & Decker. I think this quote from their full truckload manager speaks to that. But then also one thing we've seen is the expansion. So they've gone from 1 location now to 5 outbound locations and tripled their volume. So really successful program. And we expect to see a lot more from Black & Decker. And then we have one more example. Dan, you could maybe take us through that one as well.
So in this example, we have a Fortune 500 airliner who was experiencing PTA issues around some volatile freight. We're talking team loads, short notice, refrigerated, and some pretty volatile markets. We put together a pricing model for them to kind of solve for this with our Reliable Contracts program. And since then, they've not had to do any more rebidding, no more restructuring of their routing guide, and they've taken the freight off the spot market. What that's solved is now they have complete 100% their acceptance because we're taking all of the freight. And because they're able to ride the market down in this floating structure, they've seen 20% freight cost savings from when they started originally back in January. And we continue to drive that down even further as the market softens.
So in conclusion, if there's anything that you kind of taken from this presentation, it's one, to start moving away from static contracts and fixed rates and start to introduce more dynamic pricing, again, as a tool in your transportation tool belt. The benefit here is that it works in any market condition. So you get that 100% guaranteed coverage in any market, especially now in a soft market. You can actually drive savings without having to rebid or reprice. And then lastly, with that guaranteed capacity, it's automated, it's efficient. You can really streamline your booking. And so if you want to learn a little bit more about Reliable Contracts or DRG, you can actually reach out to us. We have an email alias. It's reliablecontracts@loadsmart.com to learn about our new dynamic contract solution. So thank you for joining us, and we hope to hear from you.